Good evening, practical law students. So, this week we are starting our first unit of material on Chapter 1, What is Law? Now, as we go through these notes, I kind of view this as a college class, okay? In college classes, you will be expected to take down the notes that you feel are important. So, as we go through the next several days on this chapter, What is Law? You copy down what you think is important. I will give you some heads up, like I think you need to copy this down, or I think you need to copy that down. But if you think it's important, go on and write it down. Okay. I will go on and tell you up front that if it is a bold-faced term, copy it down. Okay. So on day 2 and day 3 of this week, I would definitely get down any bold-faced terms. All right. Now, chapter 1 is all about answering this question, what is law? Okay, and it's going to provide a lot of background to where we head from here in the course of this semester. Okay, so we got to answer this question first, what is law? And then we'll talk about some historical precedents with law. So the first question, what is law? Well, law are the rules and regulations made and enforced by government that regulate the conduct of people within a society. Okay, any law is a rule or regulation made and enforced by a government that regulates the conduct of people within a society. That's why in the project you guys have been working on, one of the aspects you were supposed to do is you were supposed to come up with your own government to enforce the laws that you also come up with. Okay, so we see a couple key terms in here. We see government, we see people, and we see society. Okay, so any rule or regulation made and enforced by the government to regulate the conduct of people within a society is a law. Laws can affect almost every aspect of daily life. Okay, any law or any aspect of daily life can be impacted by a law. As we look throughout time, law changes. Okay. In fact, in all society throughout time, we have seen laws. And as society changes, what people feel is important enough to be protected by laws change. Okay. So we have seen laws throughout time in almost all societies that have existed, and they often change over time. Now, at the very base level of what law does, it is supposed to prevent confusion and disorder. Okay, it is supposed to prevent confusion and disorder. Sometimes laws are not necessarily always fair or even good. Okay, which is why it is important that you have a system in place where you can change laws. Okay, I'll give you an example, prohibition. All right, in this country, prohibition used to be considered important. All right, people were blaming alcohol for all kinds of problems within society. So we have prohibition. In fact, there was a constitutional amendment on prohibition, prohibiting the sale and distribution of alcohol. Then come to find out, actually, prohibition ended up making things worse. Okay, so there was an example of a law that was not good. So what do we have? We have a way to change it. There's another constitutional amendment that got rid of prohibition because people realized it was not a good law. It was not doing its desired effect. Okay, so sometimes laws are not always fair or even good, which is why it's important to have a system in place where you can change laws. Now, the key to law working is it must be respected by the people it is intended to govern. Okay? If people don't respect it, the law loses its power. Again, that's why we need a system to change it. If people come along and they say, well, this law isn't fair or this law isn't good, and they don't respect it, then we have to have that system in place where we can change it. Okay? So laws must be respected by the people that they are intended to govern. All right. Now, on this slide, I would definitely be sure that I have a good idea of what a law is and why it is in place. It is there to prevent confusion and disorder. Now, besides the laws themselves, there's an important concept attached to law itself, and that is called Rule of law. Okay. Now, what rule of law says is that the laws must be known in advance and created through a democratic process. Okay. People must know what the law is, and it must be created through a democratic process. By the way, rule of law has its roots in Great Britain. Okay. In fact, during the American Revolution, one of our arguments why we should be free is because our rights as Englishmen under the law were being ignored. Okay. So, under rule of law, laws must be known in advance and created through democratic process. The simple way of saying that is laws must apply to all members of society. If they don't, people are going to lose respect for them. Okay? So, the real short definition of what rule of law is the law must apply to all members of society. Again, the people are required to support the legal system and obey its laws. Doesn't mean it's always going to be perfect. That's why you need that system in place where you can change things. But it goes back, people must respect the law, they must support it, and they must obey it. And then the last concept tied to rule of law is this idea that no one is above the law, not even the king. Okay, if you go back and you look at world history, this was a problem in England at one point in time, that some of the kings were abusing their power and they saw themselves as above the law. Okay, and that led to conflicts within English history. Okay, and I got a little British flag here because, like I said, this principle of rule of law has its roots in the British system. Okay, so if you're looking for a real quick definition of rule of law, the laws apply to all people. No one is above the law. Okay, that's the concept of rule of law. The laws apply to all people. No one is above the law. Now, one of the purposes of law, we said it's there to prevent confusion and disorder. And it prevents confusion and disorder because law illustrates our values. Okay, we're going to talk about law and values here. All right. Laws generally reflect and promote a society's values, what society feels important. Okay. That's why when we go over your group presentations, I'll be interested to see what laws you guys came up with. That's part of my method in having you guys do that project is I want to see what you guys think are important for your society because your laws will reflect that. Okay. They are supposed to protect traditional ideas of right and wrong. Okay. So again, they reflect society's values, what we think of as right and wrong. It is important to remember that not everything that is immoral is illegal. Okay. Again, let's go back to prohibition. There were some people that thought alcohol was immoral. And at one point in time, it was legal. Then prohibition made it illegal. Then it caused more problems. So we took prohibition away. Prohibition became illegal. Okay. Alcohol became legal again. All right. So not everything that is immoral is necessarily illegal. Now, this can lead to problems because of conflict between the major goals. All right. And we're going to talk about the goals here in just a second. All right. And of course, you guys can probably already figure out different people have a different idea of what is right and wrong in society. Okay. If you look at the history of this country, Jim Crow laws, black codes that legalized segregation, there were some people that thought that was perfectly okay. But over time, we realized it was not. Okay. And we have to get rid of those Jim Crow laws and those black codes. All right. So there is, when we talk about value, there is a conflict among people because there are going to be differences in what is right and what is wrong. That does not mean we should be negative about it. That does not mean we should throw the idea of law out. We do try to strive for balance. Okay, we do try to strive for balance. Now, what are the goals of the law? I would definitely copy these down. Okay, I would definitely copy these down. The number one goal of the law is to protect human rights. Okay? That is the number one goal, is to protect people's rights. Okay? Number two is to promote fairness. Again, it goes back to the idea of rule of law. Laws apply to all people. No one is above the law. It's fair, all right? We have to promote fairness. Number three, the law helps resolve conflict. If your rights are violated, the law is there to prevent conflict, okay? It is there to punish those that would violate your rights. That's the conflict, okay? We want to prevent that and resolve that. They help promote order and stability in society. Okay, they promote order and stability in society, again, because they're supposed to apply to all people. They're supposed to promote desirable social and economic behavior. All right, this ties into the idea of values, what we think is important, what we think is right or wrong. The laws are there to promote desirable social and economic behavior. Now, here's where the conflict arises. Law is supposed to represent the will of the majority, okay? Especially in a democratic country where you have people voting on them, it's supposed to represent the will of the majority while protecting the rights of the minority, okay? And this is where we often have conflict because oftentimes minorities are quick to point out our rights aren't being protected, and that is the number one goal of the law. Okay, so this is where we see conflict between the majority and the minority. You want laws created by the majority, but the laws that are created also need to defend the minority. And that's where we lead to conflict. And that's where I say we try to really strive for balance. And the system that we've created in order to change laws is there to promote this idea that the majority has a say, but at the same time, the minority rights will be protected. Okay? And I know we can debate whether or not that's true or not in society and things like that. In fact, that's one of the things I hope is going to happen as we go through this semester, is we can talk about stuff like that and come to a consensus about what's going on. Okay, but got to represent the majority while protecting the rights of minority. Now, the last thing in this lesson, again, talking about law and values. Laws can be based on moral values, economic values, political values, and social values. Okay. Now, I would get these down. Okay. So here's some bold-faced terms. All right. When we talk about moral values, what we are talking about are basic ideas of right and wrong. Okay. Moral law deals with fundamental questions of right and wrong. Okay. Economic law, all right, should be fairly simple. It's based on wealth, okay? It deals with the accumulation, preservation, use, and distribution of wealth, okay? So you can have moral values, you can have economic values, you can have moral law, you can have economic law. This is what it's based on. Moral law, questions of right and wrong. Economic law deals with wealth, okay? Then we have political law, political values. They deal with the relationship between government and individuals. Okay. Not only are our rights going to be protected, but how can we prevent the government from abusing its power? Okay. The government needs power to protect our rights. In fact, that's one of the ideas with creating a government and creating a society is we agree to give up some of our rights to the government in order for them to protect us through law. Okay. And political values and political law deal with this relationship. All right. How are our rights going to be protected? And how often are we going to protect ourselves from the government? What is the relationship between individuals and the government? And then last but not least, social values, social laws. Of course, since we're talking about social, we're talking about society. Okay. Social laws deal with things that are important to a society as a whole. Okay. And these can change over time. Right. Now, no matter what we're talking about, if we're talking about moral, economic, political, social law, moral, political, economic, social values, the laws are designed to protect certain values. Now, those laws may interfere with other values, which is why you have that conflict, and why the system of government that you create is so important, so it can deal with that conflict. Okay? Again, it's the eternal struggle. How do we deal with the will of the majority while protecting the rights of the minority? As we go through, as great as law is and as important as it is, and as we go through, and you're going to hear me say this, I mean, really, I believe in the law. It is very, very important. I think we have a good system. All right, it's not perfect, but I think we have a good system. It is important to remember that there is a limit to what laws can reasonably be expected to do. As much as I'm going to promote it, okay, and as much as I'm going to say it's great, it is important to remember that laws are not perfect. All right, there is a limit to what they can be reasonably expected to do. All right, so that's just some background. That's kind of a good definition of what law is. We've got the concept of rule of law. We talked about the goals of the law, okay, values, how law is supposed to represent our values. Tomorrow, in the next lesson, what we're going to pick up with is we're going to pick up with the idea of human rights, okay? Since the number one goal of law is to protect your rights, we're going to talk about what are human rights, okay, and how have they been protected throughout time.